Hello everyone, welcome to Starry Ari's ASMR. I am Ari, and today, as you can see, I have another puzzle video for you. So I will link my first video where I worked on and solved the edges of this puzzle, and unfortunately, there was one piece missing. And I was not sure whether I had just not sorted it out from the other pieces or if it was truly missing because this puzzle was thrifted. Now, as I'm doing this voiceover, I have completed this puzzle, and it took me a while to have the time to edit the footage, so I'm just kind of getting to this voiceover now, and I know that there were actually two pieces missing. And I wanted to donate this puzzle again, so I found a tutorial online for creating your own puzzle pieces to match your puzzle if you happen to have any missing pieces. So I did work on that, so you will see that at the very end. I mean, if you happen to watch all the way through. So rest assured, it does end up looking fully complete. So this very fun, colorful puzzle is of a bright unicorn, and there's lots of flowers and butterflies and just tons and tons of color everywhere. And I had a really fun time putting this one together just because of all of those bright colors. Now this puzzle was 750 pieces, and I did end up spreading it out over quite a few days, so I don't know exactly how long it took me, but it certainly was not a short puzzle. I did enjoy the size of the puzzle pieces. I felt like they were pretty large, so that was kind of nice. I originally started with just trying to do the unicorn head because I thought that that would be those would be the easiest pieces for me to grab out. And then I kind of worked my way around the head with all of the colors. And then I filled in the flowers and butterflies all around the picture after that. So I had a really fun time putting this one together just because of all of the really fun, bright colors. And about halfway through, my husband does help me a little bit, so you'll see his arms come into shot. But I was trying to think of things that I wanted to do for this voiceover, and we had gotten to talking about unicorns as a mythical creature and how interesting it is. And my husband had heard that it might have stemmed from retellings of descriptions of rhinoceros. So rhinos. And as soon as he said that, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. You know, in human history, there were very, very few people that were able to travel around and see these exotic animals or exotic to them. And then when they came back, they were able to describe these animals. And then, of course, it makes sense over centuries that those descriptions might get a little bit muddled. So I thought that was a really interesting theory, and it kind of just got me interested in the history of the unicorns, the history of the myth in general, kind of their interactions with humans, and I thought that was maybe an interesting video. So I did not take the time to get a degree in mythical creatures or cryptozoology before making this video, so what I have instead done is pull up the Wikipedia page for unicorns, and I'm sure that that will give me exactly accurate information and nothing incorrect at all. So today I'm just going to be reading from that Wikipedia page, and yeah, was being sarcastic. Maybe don't take everything in this video as fact. I have not fact checked any of this. I mean, it's about unicorns, right? So like there's only so much that you can fact check, but I imagine that a lot of it, just kind of glancing over, is references to their description throughout history and since antiquity, and just kind of references to them, so those might be correct or incorrect. I can't speak to them. Now, I have glanced over the Wikipedia page, and I imagine that there are going to be lots of moments where I mispronounce something, especially lots of names, so please give me a little bit of grace with that. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So the unicorn is a legendary creature that has been described since antiquity as a beast with a single large, pointed, spiraling horn projecting from its forehead. In European literature and art, the unicorn has, for the last 1,000 years or so, been depicted as a white horse or goat-like animal with a long, straight horn with spiraling grooves, cloven hooves, and sometimes a goat's beard. I don't know if I've ever seen a depiction of a unicorn with a goat's beard. In the Middle Ages and Renaissance, it was commonly described as an extremely wild woodland creature, a symbol of purity and grace, which could be captured only by a virgin. In encyclopedias, its horn was described as having the power to render poisoned water potable and to heal sickness. In medieval and Renaissance times, the tusk of the narwhal was sometimes sold as a unicorn horn. Ooh, tricky people. A bovine type of unicorn is thought by some scholars to have been depicted in seals of the Bronze Age Indus Valley civilization, the interpretation remaining controversial. An equine form of the unicorn was mentioned by the ancient Greeks in accounts of natural history by various writers, and the only one here I recognize is Pliny the Younger, so I'm not going to attempt and butcher the other names. The Bible also describes an animal which some translations render as unicorn. The unicorn continues to hold a place in popular culture. It is often used as a symbol of fantasy or rarity. In the 21st century, it has become an LGBTQ symbol with its relation to the rainbow. The history. The Indus Valley Civilization. A creature with a single horn, conventionally called a unicorn, is the most common image on the soapstone stamp seals of the Bronze Age Indus Valley Civilization from the centuries around 2000 BC. It has a body more like a cow than a horse, and a curved horn that goes forward, then up at the tip. The mysterious feature depicted coming down from the front of the back is usually shown. It may represent a harness or other covering. Typically, the unicorn faces a vertical object with at least 2 stages. This is variously described as a ritual offering stand, an incense burner, or a manger. The animal is always in profile on Indus seals, but the theory that it represents animals with 2 horns, one hiding the other, is disproved by a much smaller number of small terracotta unicorns, probably toys, and the profile depictions of bulls where both horns are clearly shown. It is thought that the unicorn was the symbol of a powerful clan or merchant community, but may also have had some religious significance. In South Asia, the unicorn is only seen during the Indus Valley Civilization period and disappeared in South Asian art after this. Jonathan Mark Kenoyer stated the Indus Valley Civilization unicorn has no direct connection with the later unicorn motifs observed in other parts of the world. Nonetheless, it remains possible that this unicorn had contributed to later myths of fantastical one-horned creatures in West Asia. Classical antiquity. Unicorns are not found in Greek mythology, but rather in the accounts of natural history, for Greek writers of natural history were convinced of the reality of unicorns, which they believed lived in India, a distant and fabulous realm for them. The earliest description is from Ctesias, who in his book Indica, or On India, described them as wild asses, fleet of foot, having a horn a cubit and a half, which is about 28 inches in length, and colored white, red, and black. Unicorn meat was said to be too bitter to eat. Ctesias got his information while living in Persia. Unicorns, or more likely winged bulls, appear in reliefs at the ancient Persian capital of Persepolis, I believe, in Iran. Aristotle must be following Ctesias when he mentions two one-horned animals, the oryx, which was a kind of antelope, and the so-called Indian ass. Strabo says that in the Caucasus there were one-horned horses with stag-like heads. Pliny the Elder mentions the oryx and an Indian ox, perhaps a greater one-horned rhinoceros, as one-horned beasts, as well as a very fierce animal called the monoceros, which has the head of the stag, the feet of the elephant, and the tail of the boar, while the rest of the body is like that of the horse. It makes a deep lowing noise and has a single black horn which projects from the middle of its forehead 2 cubits, about 35 inches in length. In On the Nature of Animals, Ilian, quoting Ctesias, adds that India produces also a one-horned horse, and says that the monoceros was sometimes called cartazanos, which may be a form of the Arabic carcadon, meaning rhinoceros. I'm probably butchering all of these names, and I apologize. Cosmas Indicopleustes, the 6th century Greek traveler who journeyed to India and the kingdom of Aksum, gives a description of a unicorn based on 4 bronze figures he saw in the 4-towered palace of the king of Ethiopia. He states, from report, they speak of him as a terrible beast and quite invincible, and that all its strength lies in its horn. When he finds himself pursued by many hunters and on the point of being caught, he springs up to the top of some precipice whence he throws himself down, and in the descent turns a somersault, so that the horn sustains all the shock of the fall, and he escapes unhurt. I feel like that's kind of crazy. Can you imagine just a unicorn barreling through the woods and jumping off of a cliff, horn first? The Middle Ages and Renaissance. Medieval knowledge of unicorns stemmed from biblical and ancient sources, and unicorns were variously represented as a kind of wild ass, goat, or horse. Several European medieval travelers claimed to have seen unicorns in their travels outside of Europe. For example, Felix Fabry claimed to have seen a unicorn in Sinai. The predecessor of the medieval bestiary compiled in late antiquity and known as Physiologus, popularized an elaborate allegory in which a unicorn, trapped by a maiden, representing the Virgin Mary, stood for the incarnation. As soon as the unicorn sees her, it lays its head on her lap and falls asleep. This became a basic emblematic tag that underlies medieval notions of the unicorn, justifying its appearance in both secular and religious art. The unicorn is often shown hunted, raising parallels both with vulnerable virgins and sometimes the Passion of Christ. The myths refer to a beast with one horn that can only be tamed by a virgin. Subsequently, some writers translated this into an allegory for Christ's relationship with the Virgin Mary. The unicorn also figured in courtly terms. For some 13th century French authors, the lover is attracted to his lady as the unicorn is to the Virgin. With the rise of humanism, the unicorn also acquired more orthodox secular meanings, emblematic of chaste love and faithful marriage. However, when the unicorn appears in the medieval legend of Barlaam and Josaphat, I think, ultimately derived from the life of the Buddha, it represents death, as the Golden Legend explains. Unicorns in religious art largely disappeared after they were condemned by Molinists after the Council of Trent. The unicorn, tameable only by a virgin woman, was well established in medieval lore by the time Marco Polo described them as scarcely smaller than elephants. They have the hair of a buffalo and feet like an elephant's. They have a single large black horn in the middle of the forehead. They have a head like a wild boar's. They spend their time by preference wallowing in mud and slime. They are very ugly brutes to look at. They are not at all such as we describe them when we relate that they let themselves be captured by virgins, but clean contrary to our notions. It is clear that Marco Polo was describing a rhinoceros. I love that. The alicorn. The horn itself and the substance it was made of was called alicorn, and it was believed that the horn holds magical and medicinal properties. The Danish physician Ole Worm determined in 1638 that the alleged alicorns were the tusks of narwhals. Such beliefs were examined wittily and at length in 1646 by Sir Thomas Browne. False alicorn powder made from the tusks of narwhals or horns of various animals was sold in Europe for medicinal purposes as late as 1741. Alicorn was thought to cure many diseases and have the ability to detect poisons, and many physicians would make cures and sell them. Cups were made from alicorn for kings and given as a gift. These were usually made of ivory or walrus ivory. Entire horns were very precious in the Middle Ages and were often really the tusks of narwhals. Entrapment. One traditional method of hunting unicorns involved entrapment by a virgin. In one of his notebooks, Leonardo da Vinci wrote, "The unicorn, through its intemperance and not knowing how to control itself, for the love it bears to fair maidens, forgets its ferocity and wildness, and laying aside all fear, it will go up to a seated damsel and go to sleep in her lap, and thus the hunters take it." The famous late Gothic series of 7 tapestry hangings, The Hunt of the Unicorn, are a high point in European tapestry manufacture, combining both secular and religious themes. The tapestry tapestries now hang in the Cloisters division of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. In the series, richly dressed noblemen, accompanied by huntsmen and hounds, pursue a unicorn against millefleur backgrounds or settings of buildings and gardens. They bring the animal to bay with the help of a maiden who traps it with her charms, appear to kill it, and bring it back to the castle. In the last and most famous panel, The Unicorn in Captivity, the unicorn is shown alive again and happy, chained to a pomegranate tree surrounded by a fence in a field of flowers. Scholars conjecture that the red stains on its flanks are not blood, but rather the juice from pomegranates, which were a symbol of fertility. However, the true meaning of the mysterious resurrected unicorn in the last panel is unclear. The series was woven about 1500 in the Low Countries, probably Brussels, for an unknown patron. A set of 6 engravings on the same theme, treated rather differently, were engraved by a French artist in the 1540s. Another famous set of 6 tapestries were also woven in the southern Netherlands before 1500 and show the 5 senses, the gateways to temptation, and finally love, with unicorns featured in each piece. Facsimiles of these unicorn tapestries were woven for permanent display in Stirling Castle, Scotland, to take the place of a set recorded in the castle in a 16th century inventory. A rather rare late 15th century variant depiction of the Hortus Conclusus in religious art combined the Annunciation to Mary with the themes of the Hunt of the Unicorn and Virgin and Unicorn, so popular in secular art. The unicorn already functioned as a symbol of the Incarnation, and whether this meaning is intended in many secular depictions can be a difficult matter of scholarly interpretation. There is no such ambiguity in the scenes where the Archangel Gabriel is shown blowing a horn as hounds chase the unicorn into the Virgin's arms and a little Christ child descends on rays of light from God the Father. The Council of Trent finally banned this somewhat over-elaborated if charming depiction, partly on the grounds of realism, as no one now believed the unicorn to be a real animal. Shakespeare scholars describe unicorns being captured by a hunter standing in front of a tree, the unicorn goaded into charging. The hunter would step aside the last moment, and the unicorn would embed its horn deeply into the tree. Heraldry. In heraldry, a unicorn is often depicted as a horse with a goat's cloven hooves and beard, a lion's tail, and a slender spiral horn on its forehead. Non-equine attributes may be replaced with equine ones. Whether because it was an emblem of the Incarnation or of the fearsome animal passions of raw nature, the unicorn was not widely used in early heraldry, but became popular from the 15th century. Though sometimes shown collared and chained, which may be taken as an indication that it has been tamed or tempered, it is more usually shown collared with a broken chain attached, showing that it has broken free from its bondage. In heraldry, the unicorn is best known as a symbol of Scotland. The unicorn was believed to be the natural enemy of the lion, a symbol that the English royals had adopted around 100 years before. 2 unicorns supported the royal arms of the King of Scots and Duke of Rothesay. And since the 1707 union of England and Scotland, the royal arms of the United Kingdom have been supported by a unicorn along with an English lion. two versions of the royal arms exist. That used in Scotland gives more emphasis to the Scottish elements, placing the unicorn on the left and giving it a crown, whereas the version used in England and elsewhere gives the English elements more prominence. Golden coins, known as the unicorn and half-unicorn, both with the unicorn on the obverse, were used in Scotland in the 15th and 16th century. In the same realm, carved unicorns were often used as finials on the pillars of Mercat crosses and denoted that the settlement was a royal burgh. Certain noblemen, such as the Earl of Kinnoul, were given special permission to use the unicorn in their arms as an augmentation of honor. The crest for Clan Cunningham bears the unicorn head. Queer culture. By the beginning of the 21st century, unicorns became a queer icon, second only to the rainbow flag, symbolizing queerness. The rainbow flag, created by American artist Gilbert Baker in 1978 as a joyous symbol of the diversity of the queer community, became prominent during the gay rights protests of the 1970s and 1980s. Unicorns, which were intrinsically linked to rainbows since the Victorian era, became a symbol of the community. There is no consensus on how the unicorns became a gay icon. Alice Fisher, an editor of Observer Design magazine, notes that the values of a unicorn as rare and magical have resulted in the word being used with various connotations. However, she argues that the Victorian association between rainbows and unicorns has resulted in unicorns becoming the queer icon. A New Orleans journalist who identifies as queer, Tracy Ann Duncan, described her connection to unicorns when she watched The Last Unicorn as a child. In the film, the protagonist believed she was one of a kind throughout her life. Tracy was able to relate to that feeling, even though she did not really know what her kind was at that time. Some argue that the gender fluidity of the unicorn makes it a suitable representation of the community. In ancient myths, the unicorn is portrayed as male, whereas in the modern times it is typically depicted as a female creature. Similar animals in religion and myth. An animal called the Reem is mentioned in several places in the Hebrew Bible, often as a metaphor representing strength. The allusions to the Reem as a wild, untamable animal of great strength and agility with mighty horn or horns best fits the aurochs. This view is further supported by the Assyrian cognate word rimu, which is often used as a metaphor of strength and is depicted as a powerful, fierce, wild mountain bull with large horns. This animal is often depicted in ancient Mesopotamian art in profile with only one horn visible. The translators of the authorized King James Version of the Bible in 1611 followed the Greek Septuagint and the Latin Vulgate, and employed unicorn to translate Reem, providing a recognizable animal that was proverbial for its untamable nature. The American Standard Version translates this term wild ox in each case. The classical Jewish understanding of the Bible did not identify the ram animal as the unicorn. However, some rabbis in the Talmud debate the proposition that the Tahash animal was a domestic, single-horned, kosher creature that existed in Moses' time, or that it was similar to the Koresh animal described in Marcus Jastro's Talmudic dictionary as a kind of antelope unicorn. Chinese mythology. I'm going to butcher this name. The qilin, a creature in Chinese mythology, is sometimes called the Chinese unicorn, and some ancient accounts describe a single horn as its defining feature. However, it is more accurately described as a hybrid animal that looks less unicorn than chimera, with the body of a deer, the head of a lion, green scales, and a long, forwardly curved horn. The Japanese version more closely resembles the Western unicorn, even though it is based on the Chinese qilin. The K-Lai of Vietnamese myth, similarly sometimes mistranslated unicorn, is a symbol of wealth and prosperity that made its first appearance during the Duong dynasty, about 600 CE, to Emperor Duong Kaito after a military victory which resulted in his conquest of Tai Nguyen. Beginning in the Ming dynasty, qilin became associated with giraffes. After Cheng Hei's voyage to East Africa brought a pair of the long-necked animals and introduced them at court in Nanjing as qilin. The resemblance was noted in the giraffe's ossicones, or the bony protrusions from the skull resembling horns, graceful movements, and peaceful demeanor. Shan Haijing mentioned the bow horse, a chimera horse with an ox tail, a single horn, a white body, and a sound like a person calling. The creature was said to live at Honest Head Mountain. Kyopu, in his Zhangfu, said that the bow horse was able to walk on water. Another similar creature, also mentioned in Shan Haijing, and said to live in Mount Winding Center, was the bow, but it had a black tail, tiger's teeth and claws, devoured leopards and tigers. The Hornless Unicorn. In the Lady and the Unicorn tapestry set of about 1500, it has been claimed the Taste tapestry shows a young unicorn without a horn among the animals in the Millefleur background above the two women. The alabaster burial monument of Henry Manners, the second Earl of Rutland, shows a hornless unicorn at his feet. I'm confused about how they know that those are meant to be hornless unicorns and not just horses, because the pictures they have here, they just look like horses to me. So that was the entirety of the Wikipedia page. I also found a page for the unicorn in the Britannica, so I wanted to read through that and then maybe see if there's any better information or different new information. Unicorn is a mythological animal resembling a horse or a goat with a single horn on its forehead. The unicorn appeared in early Mesopotamian artworks, and it also was referred to in the ancient myths of India and China. The earliest description in Greek literature of a single-horned animal was by the historian Ctesias. We did learn about him, who related that the Indian wild ass was the size of a horse with a white body, purple head, and blue eyes, and on its forehead was a cubit-long horn, colored red at the pointed tip, black in the middle, and white at the base. Those who drank from its horn were thought to be protected from stomach trouble, epilepsy, and poison. It was very fleet of foot and difficult to capture. The actual animal behind Ctesias' description was probably the Indian rhinoceros. Certain poetical passages of the Bible refer to a strong and splendid horned animal called Riem. This word was translated unicorn or rhinoceros in many versions of the Bible, but many modern translations prefer wild ox which is the correct meaning of the Hebrew riyah. As a biblical animal, the unicorn was interpreted allegorically in the early Christian church. One of the earliest such interpretations appears in the ancient Greek bestiary known as the physiologus, which states that the unicorn is a strong, fierce animal that can be caught only if a virgin maiden is placed before it. The unicorn leaps into the virgin's lap, and she suckles it and leads it to the king's palace. Medieval writers thus likened the unicorn to Christ, who raised up a horn of salvation for mankind and dwelt in the womb of the Virgin Mary. Other legends tell of the unicorn's combat with the elephant, whom it finally spears to death with its horn, and of the unicorn's purifying of poisoned waters with its horn so that other animals may drink. Cups reputedly made of unicorn horn, but actually made of rhinoceros horn or narwhal tusk, were highly valued by important persons in the Middle Ages as a protection against poisoned drinks. Many fine representations of the hunt of the unicorn survive in medieval art, not only in Europe, but also in the Islamic world and in China. So that was pretty much everything that I wanted to read off about unicorns. Not a whole lot, but I thought it was pretty interesting. I think it's kind of fun to learn about. I think some of the ways that legends and myths evolve throughout history, and I think it's really quite apparent that as humans we just kind of run with stories, and stories are such an important aspect of humanity, of culture, of a shared culture. And I think it's fun to see that even something as maybe silly or frivolous as a unicorn can have actually quite deeply rooted history, and even some, religious notes, and just overall pretty interesting. I did not have a huge unicorn phase when I was a child, but I did love horses, and with that I would get lots of horse figurines, and I do remember that I had a couple of My Little Ponies, and I did have one unicorn horse figurine that I can remember, and I did love it so much. But this puzzle in particular, I think it's satisfying kind of seeing it come together. Alright, I am going to take a break and let you enjoy visuals of me solving the puzzle. I think I will end off with some lovely puzzle tapping sounds and scratching on the puzzle pieces. And those two pieces that I created, which was kind of a bit of a process, but I'm glad that I did that. so that now we can enjoy this full puzzle. I think I'm probably going to put these two pieces in a really small Ziploc baggie before I put them back in the box. That way they don't get too mixed in or beat up, because this is just cardboard glued together basically. So for whoever gets this puzzle next time, hopefully they will appreciate the effort that I put into putting together these puzzle pieces. Maybe they will want to do their own and make it a little bit better. I hope that you enjoyed this sped up time lapse of watching me complete this puzzle. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you have